Despite some of my favorite games having a greater focus on action and narrative, I've got to say, I really do love a good puzzle game. But so few games manage to achieve that challenging sweet spot between clever design and frustration, and fewer still bring something entirely new to the table. A Fold Apart, developed by Lightning Rod Games, not only delivers a fresh take on problem solving and a steady difficulty curve, it also features a surprisingly touching story. If only it were a little bit longer. A Fold Apart follows the ups and downs of a long-distance relationship between a teacher and an architect, and it jumps between the characters regularly to show their respective points of view and inner thoughts regarding their relationship woes. It presents a very small-scale, personal story, and although I feel like it could have been stretched out a little bit longer, I really appreciate how it unfolds, no pun intended. The exploration of how communication-dependent long-distance relationships are and how tiny things can be misconstrued and blown out of proportion feels true to life, and representing the characters' inner struggles as puzzles feels appropriate. Overall, A Fold Apart's narrative feels genuine and heartfelt, and it's certainly unique as far as video game stories go. But obviously this limits its appeal somewhat, and if you aren't keen on romantic drama in your video games, then this probably won't be for you. Beyond its niche appeal, however, the story does feel like it's resolved a bit too quickly. It feels as though the interpersonal drama is only beginning to ramp up before the game starts wrapping up, and it all feels a bit too clean by the end. By that same token, it genuinely feels as though the game's puzzles are coming into their own just as A Fold Apart comes to a close. With a runtime of only 2 hours, if I'm being generous, the game was over before I got a chance to properly sink my teeth into its clever gameplay, and although I'm usually fine with a game leaving me wanting more, there is a limit to that. Despite its brief runtime, however, the game is home to a surprising number of refreshing puzzle mechanics that feel thematically relevant. The entire game takes place on a series of pages, and each page has 2 sides that exist simultaneously. Each puzzle tasks you with getting from point A to point B, pretty straightforward so far, but you do so by manipulating the page that you're on. You can fold edges so that the 2 sides of the page, and thus the 2 separate worlds, can interact with one another, or maybe even turn a page to affect a puzzle's gravity. Later on you can begin to combine these mechanics, but even early stages let you do some cool things like folding the top of a page to have an element of one side fall down onto the other. Overall, I found the folding mechanic to be incredibly simple yet effective. I feel like it's the first time I've seen paper folding mechanics in a puzzle game like this, and they honestly feel really intuitive to use. They just work exactly the way you think they would. For instance, folding the right edge of a side inward means that the opposite side's left edge is going to become a part of the first side. Or folding a corner means that the platforms on that section of the page are going to turn 90 degrees. It just makes sense. In addition to its unique mechanics, the game also presents players with a pretty steady difficulty curve, thanks to the gradual rate at which new mechanics are introduced, and most of A Fold Apart's puzzles will make you think without feeling super obtuse. With that said, it does feel like the game could have introduced a few more difficult puzzles to properly hammer home that sense of mastery that most great puzzle games achieve. As I mentioned, you do get to combine some mechanics in the later levels, but these challenges feel like they're gone just as quickly as they arrived, and before you know it, the credits are rolling. A Fold Apart's length isn't its only issue though. Despite being a rather minor element, I found moving the characters around, specifically interacting with and climbing on top of boxes, to be slow and clunky. If you accidentally press the climb button instead of the pull button, you have to wait a good second for your character to climb on top of a box before waiting for them to climb off again. This probably sounds really nitpicky, but I found it so frustrating at times, and to be honest, outside of the fresh approach to puzzles, there just isn't a whole lot to talk about in terms of this game and its gameplay. Beyond the gameplay, I do really enjoy the visual style of A Fold Apart, with its separate warm and cool color schemes for each character. It's a nice touch that evokes the distance between the characters in addition to keeping the game's look from getting boring. I also quite like its use of typography to communicate each character's inner thoughts, and the way they twist and turn during later puzzles is a nice touch. I'd also like to point out that the game lets you choose your characters, so that you can have either party be male or female presenting to better reflect your own experiences. It's a small touch, but it's definitely appreciated. Alongside its simple visual style, the game's soundtrack is rather soothing overall, with plenty of light strings and piano, although there are definitely some somber tracks in the mix as well to punctuate moments of inner turmoil. There's nothing incredibly fancy to speak of with regards to A Fold Apart's presentation, but the straightforward visuals and music set the game's tone about as well as you might hope, making for an enjoyable experience overall. It truly is a shame that this enjoyable experience isn't that long, and once you've completed one playthrough, there's little reason to go back and play it again. There aren't any additional challenges, and the story is mostly linear, beyond some phone conversations where you can choose a reply or two, so the odds of most players picking A Fold Apart up again once they've hit the credits aren't very high at all. This is very much a replay in an afternoon a few years after you first played it kind of game. A Fold Apart is good. Despite its disappointing runtime and my minor frustration with interacting with boxes, I found A Fold Apart to be a really pleasant experience. It tells a story you don't often see in the medium of video games, and does so with mechanics that are not only thematically appropriate, but unique to the genre. If you don't mind spending 27 Australian dollars on something that will last 2 hours and maybe never be played again, then A Fold Apart is definitely worth checking out. It's short, but it's very sweet.